I think 40. That's why it cuts off. But I'm all. That's why I also go live on YouTube as well, man. I try. I hope my brothers please check my YouTube page out, man. I got a lot of lectures on there, and I try to. I've been uploading stuff from years ago. Man, I got over 500 lectures. I've been in Arizona for about 5 years, been doing lectures, but I have a plethora of them. But please, Morris, check my YouTube page out. Kari Ibn Hakeem Goodman Bey. It's free. But back to the point. But the author argument was that the Aryan race uh, uh, originated in the Great Cotino swamps between the Pripet, Pripet, between the Pripet, the Berezina, and the Dnieper, the Dnieper. And he said in that area or that particular landmass, depigmentation or albinism is very prevalent. And here he considers the fair, the white race originated. This is their pen, not me. In this swamp, he thinks, lived the Pile dwellers, who afterwards extended themselves to the Swiss lakes and the valley of the Po, the Po. The archaic character of the neighboring Lithuanian language induced him to believe that the Lithuanians were a surviving relic of the oldest Aryan race. Indeed, Mo. Indeed, Mo. When I keep telling you, Europeans, when it's just to connect the dots, when I read the encyclopedia, man, when a Jew is nothing, when I say, man, they're from Europe, so you connect the dots, it's only two land masses. If you do historical, all through history, Europeans was coming to the continent of Africa and Kebalan because they were dying off at the age of 20. It's just a fact. But anyway. Now, in the beginning, Moors, the second out of Africa migration, which they like to say, the first humans to Australia. Man, it's just historically. I mean, when people talk about, they don't want to give you Jerusalem because Jerusalem is right in Africa. It was named four names. Judah, Abir, Kwahuda, and I forget the other one. So that's why we didn't recognize it. Right there in the landmass of Africa, or Kebalan, right in Benin. From a historical fact, Morris. So we remove our religious dogma and go with who we are from a historical fact and from a historical aspect and from a so-called religious aspect. It's there. And we don't have to argue or be coming from a lower spirit and hate. That's not how we operate. But Moors, let's keep it in proper context. The second out of Africa migration event, the first being humans to Australia. For real, Moors. Saw blacks from Africa with straight hair and Mongolian features taking an Indian or inland route through Southern Asia. When you look up the Africas in Asia, I mean, I can show you all so much film. Look up, research a film, the Africas in Asia or the Asian Africa. Research the Black Buddha, the Guanatown Buddha. When he sits on the seven serpents, it's a synchronicity. I'm telling you, Morris, it's there. We must be willing to do the work. It's there. I promise you. You don't have to operate on no hate. Research the Buddha Sambo. It's there. Documents, long documents. So, but the route through Southern Asia and on top to China, where they settled, included with this group were straight-haired so-called blacks without Mongol features, now called what? Dravidians, who stayed close to Africa or Kebalan or Mexima or whatever one of the names you want to call it, which was if you understand the different dialects or the different tongues. Man, it's just history. We got to be correct when we say names. The name Africa don't come from no European or no Cypriot Africanus. I did that lecture the other day. We got to understand nicknames. That wasn't even his birth name. So I want proper context though. but they settled in India and other areas of Southern Asia. But also included with the second out of Africa group were albinos. Were albinos more than, it's not nothing to come on hate. It is just history from a historical aspect, who were probably motivated by a quest for relief from the heat and burning sunshine of Southern Africa. Because when you have that deep pigment, that sun is very hot to the skin. And relief from the torment heaped upon them by normal Africans. Even today, Moors, superstitious, so-called blacks of Southern Africa, maim and mutilate, albinos in the ignorant belief that their body parts process or possess magical properties, which they use in rituals. Come on, man. I can show you the modern man's migration out of Africa in circa 62,000 BC and 45,000 BC. I can show you this. Fully modern man, Grimaldia man, enters Europe at Gibraltar or Gibraltar, circa 45,000 BC. Not Cro-Magnon. It's so much things that they should, like, we just have to debate and understand these things and do the research and look. You know? And one question was like, this is the genesis of the so-called white European, but we knew certainly that they were albinos, and this is the history, and this is stuff that we study. Because ancient writers described them as such. Ancient writers, not modern. When brothers be talking about modern Hebrew, and I say that's gibberish. If you don't understand Paleo Hebrew, that's ancient writings. But the ancient writers described them as albinos as they moved toward Europe. You don't gotta say it to me. Research history in book 4, the Melpomene, Herodotus, in book 4, Melpomene, Melpomene. Herodotus describes the Bundini east of Ister, or Danube, Danube, of the Danube River, thusly. And I have to show you a land map, where it's at, but I'm gonna give us a little description of this land map. You got to research the map. All you got to do, man, is research the map of Ister or Danube River. But the Bundi are a large and powerful nation. They have all deep blue eyes and bright red hair. There is a city in their territory called Glenous, Gelonus, which is surrounded with a lofty wall, 30 furlongs each way, built entirely of wood. All the houses in this place and all the temples of the same material. Here are the temples built in honor of the Grecian gods and adorned after the Greek fashion with images, altars, and shrines, and all wood, blah, 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 blah. There is even a festival held every third year in honor of Bacchus, at which natives fall into the Barca, fury, for the fact that it is the Genoni, or the Geloni, were anciently Greek, who being derived out of the factories along the coast, fled to the Budini and took up their abode, or took up living quarters with them. They still speak a language half Greek, half Scythian. And so we're just talking about historical facts, man. And people, and we must know this. Now the Bundini, however, do not speak the same language as the Geloni, the Geloni, nor is their mode of life the same. They are the aboriginal people of that country and are nomads. Unlike any of the neighboring races, they eat lice. I mean, there's so much we have to know, man. Also, their pen, the Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus, 56 to 118 AD, said that this about the Germanic tribes, not the same as Germans. All have fierce blue eyes, red hair, huge frames, fit only for a sudden exertion. Peace, Mo. But the Chinese describe the Yusi, or the Kushans. You see what I'm saying? So much history, man. There's so much history. Not that type of lice, but I have to go on a whole subject of it. But the haplogroup R This is when we get into genetics and science. The haplogroup R, HAPLOG, R, the haplogroup R, in parentheses, the Y DNA. Now we're talking about human genetics, where all you have to do is do the research. In human genetics, haplogroup R is a Y chromosome. DNA, haplogroup, a subgroup of haplogroup P, defined by the M207 mutation. All you got to do is do that research, man. It'll put you in the right persona. This haplogroup is believed to have arisen around 26,800 years ago, somewhere in Central Asia or South Asia, where its ancestors, the haplogroup P, is most often found at polymorphic frequencies. There we go with those frequencies. I'm telling you. Cambridge University genetics in 2003 suggests that Southern and Western Asia might be the source of this haplogroup. When we were always around, Morris, showing that you always around, all over. Other research, origin of Y DNA, the haplogroup R, according to a genographic project conducted by the National Geographic Society per se, haplogroup RA arose about 25,000 years ago in Central Asia, and its members migrated southward as a part of the second major wave of the human migration in India. Man, there's so much stuff that you just connect the dots and you should question. Also, other historical things in writing, when even Europeans, when they say, are they albinos and are they derived from Dravidian Indians, is the genetic distance map created by the studies, genetic map from the history and geography of human genes by Calvi, Sifroas. I mean, it's so much to where we have to move the religious dogma and our feelings and get with a historical fact. But also the albinos of that era, finding India not much better than Africa at some point, Moors, decided to head further north. And they also found a pass through the Hindu Kush mountain range, now called the Khyber Pass. And they also passed through it and entered the grassland or the steppes of Central Asia, where some settled. So it's there when you look up landmass. The Eurasian steppes, when you look at maps, you know. But the Eurasian hypothesis, by the mid-50s, some non-albino researchers realized that albino European history was totally bogus and impossible to believe. The Eurasian hypothesis was introduced by Margaret Gimbus in 1956, combining Eurasian archaeology with linguistics to locate the origins of the Proto-Indo-European, or the Pi-speaking people, or the white people. I mean, this is just stuff that's written, Morris. So that's when I speak of understanding history and understanding landmass in Central Asia. That's Africa, and just putting things in its right perspective from a historical fact. When I talk about skin tone and eye color, doesn't mean nothing about your nationality, man. So when we can out and the part where people say, or some like to talk about history, so we can talk about a little bit of so-called white history from a historical aspect. But even since the assertion to power in Europe some 200 years ago, the European albinos have decided that all of the time and energies toward sustaining that history, you know. But we have to connect the dots. We have to understand the, how can I call it, the manufactured history, Morris, and be willing just to do some science and some research. But after crossing Hindu and Kush mountain range and entering Central Asia, Moors, the Dravidian albinos then spread eastwards. The most eastern albino tribe that we yet know of is the Hoa or the Hoden, known in the West as the Heplotalites, the Hephthalites, or the White Huns or Hunas. And you can look in the Encyclopedia Britannica that says that this, it says this about them. You can look in the 5th century AD, the Heplophite coin of King Lacana. Heplotite, also spelled Ephthalite, member of a people important in the history of India and Persia during the 5th and 6th centuries AD, according to Chinese chronicles. They were originally a tribe living to the north of the Great Wall and were known as Hoa or Hoden. Elsewhere, they were called White Huns or Hunas. They had no cities or systems of writing. You hear what I said? They had no cities or system of writings, lived in felt tents, and practiced polyandry. In the 5th and 6th centuries, the Heplothites or the Heplothites repeatedly invaded Persia and India. And in the mid 6th century, under the attacks of the Turks, they ceased to exist as a separate people and were probably, and this is connecting the dots. And I just challenge you to do the history, because that's what we're supposed to do, research into the surrounding population. And nothing is known of their language. Now, it must be noted that the Heplioites, the Hephthalites Moors, were no relation to the so-called Black Huns of that time, but they merely called themselves Hun in order to terrify their enemies. Moors, we have to be correct. One of my brothers on asking me, he was like, man, I'm about to read it. Hold on. He said that science you gave the other day about Africa not being named after Cyprianus was amazing. And like I was telling people, we can't get caught up in people with DVDs and saying things and portraying things as facts if we're going to say we're scholars. And all I challenge brothers to do is just do the research, because Africa wasn't named after no European. When you understand what titles and nicknames are, and all you have to do is do the history. That wasn't even his birth name. That wasn't his name. And people don't talk about his brother that conquered Asia, and he was given an Asiaticus. We don't talk about that history after he took the name. So these were appellations. These were things that was given to him after they took over certain areas, when he took over the great king in Africa, the great African king. That's only when he got that title, that nickname, Africanus only. And so we must be correct with our science and not giving our historical history away. But we got to understand landmass and Asia and really what it is and how the pen was changed. But the Yizhi, the Yuezhi, or the Ruzi, Rouzhi, were another ancient Central Asian people, Moors. Peace, Moor. I'm sorry, Brother Bonds. Peace, my brother. They are believed by most scholars, per se, to have been an Indo-European people, and many have been the same as or closely related to the Toctarians and classical sources. And this is disputed when we come from a historical aspect. But they originally settled in the arid grasslands of the eastern Tarim, the Bassin area, in which is today Yingxing, Xinjing, and western Gansu in China before they migrated to Tanzania. I mean, we're just talking about landmass, Bactria, and the northern South Asia. That's why we have to have the correct maps, where they may have been a part in forming the Kushan Empire. The first known reference to the Yuezhi are contained in the Yushoji Gunzi essays 73, 78, 80, and 81, and the tale of King Mu, son of heaven. You can research this science if you want to do the history. The dates of the most common version of this book are disputed. However, it may date to as late as the 1st century BC, Moors. The book described Yushi or Nisuzi as people from the northwest who supplied jade to the Chinese. I can go on and on with that science. But it's a drawing of a painted clay head of a Yuezhi warrior from Kachin, the province of southern Uzbekistan. And I'm telling you, got to look at things, man. When I can show you pictures of dark-skinned brothers and stuff with blue eyes, straight hair. Man, I got history of the Saxon. Man, I can show you so many documents. But according to a former USSR scholar, Zuev, Z-U-E-V, there was a queen among the large Utsis confederation who added to her possessions the land of Tochar, T-O-C-H-A-R. I want y'all to peep this out. It's there on the headwaters of the Yungan, the 3rd century BCE. There's so much history, man. But also, when we're talking about ancient sources to describe the existence of so-called white people with long hair, the Bai people of the Shanhai Jin, beyond their northwestern border, very well preserved Tyrian mummies with Caucasian features per se. And we're just talking about things what we research. According to one theory, the Yuuzhan were probably part of the large migration of Indo-European speaking people who settled in Eastern Asia at a time. The nomadic people of the Ordos culture who lived in northern China, east of the Yuuzhi, is another example, Moors. The Caucasian mummies, it's just things that we can do the science. When you're thinking skin and things has something to do with who you are. After 155 BC, the Wusun, in alliance with the Axjun, and out of the rebels from the early conflict, managed to dislodge the Yuuzhi, forcing them to move south. I'm telling you, Moors, research the science. The Yuuzhi crossed the neighboring urban civilization of the Dayum, the D-A-Y-U-A-N, in Fergana, and settled on the northern bank of the Oxus, in the region of the Transononia. Islam, in modern day Takistan and Uzbekistan, just north. They settled in Transoxiana, Transoxiana, and it was the Chinese Emperor Wu Dihan sent a Chinese mission to the Yuuzhi, led by Zhang in 126 BC. They were seeking an offense alliance, right? I mean, there's so much stuff. When you look at the pictures, man, research a picture of the Mogan cave painting. When you look at the pictures, it amazes you. The M-O-G-A-O is a cave painting. And look at what they look like. Emperor Wu Di of Han worships the Buddha. Here we go again when I say more, what we respect all the law than the prophet. Yahshua, which they say Jesus, Buddha, Confucius, Muhammad. When I talk about research the history of the Africans in Asia, the Black Sambo, the Black Buddha, it's all your science. But Emperor Wu Di of Han worships the Buddha in cave 323. The Nagas people, Moors, research that science. Emperor Wu of Han, 156 to 87 BC, personal name is Liu Qi, Liuche, was the 7th emperor of the Han dynasty of China. Emperor Wu is cited in Chinese history as the greatest emperor of the Han dynasty and one of the greatest emperors in Chinese history, Moors. I mean, I can give you, and also in the Moga cave painting, Zhang Aquina, a Chinese explorer, the first man to bring back a reliable account of the lands of Central Asia to the court of China. He was dispatched by the Han Dynasty Emperor Wu Di in 138 BC to establish relations with the Yuuzhi people. Look at the pictures, pull that stuff up. We just have to go with factual things, man, and be from a historical aspect. Also, the albinos in Central Asia. Albinos found a climate which is temperate and semi-arid to semi-humid, temperature warm to hot season, often with a cold freezing season in winter, which was the Altai region located in the heart of the southern side of Siberia, the Altai region of Russia. I mean, the Khanun rivers. We're just talking about different land masses and you can do research. I mean, We don't have to get into any, how can I say it, connotated history. What my brother say, yep, you're right, Mo. Yep. Also research another Dravidian albino people who stayed in Asia as all the others migrated west into Europe is the Nuristani people. When this is there, when I say this is the background, so it's nothing to argue about. It's just what it is. The Nuristani people are an original people of the Hindu Kush mountain area of eastern Afghanistan and the Chadra area of Pakistan, the territory formerly called Kharistan, Kaffiristan, land of the infidels. Do the research. It was renamed Nuristan, land of light or enlightenment, when the populace was forcibly converted to Islam from the local polytheistic religion by an Afghan emir, Abdul al-Rahman, at the turn of the 20th century. Do the research. We don't have to get in no religious feeling when we talk about historical facts and connecting a person to the land and how a person can be connected from the land with pseudo history. The Nuristani language belonged to the Indo-Aryan subgroup of Indo-Iranian branches. Like when I show more than the 1828 dictionary, we talk about Hellenistic. The Hellenistic was the Greek language. It talks about all that. So you make connections, but you have to understand the time period. But from a historical fact, when you do the research, no one knows why the first albinos left Central Asia. And I'm just coming from a fact, Morris, in school. And correct me if I'm wrong. And I would love for a person to say yes or no. In school, in mostly public schools and most pseudo academias, they teach children that the color spectrum comes from white to dark. They teach children and they put them in the same perspective as a person, place, or thing. And they don't teach what's the difference from a noun, a verb, an adjective, add-on words, compound words. They don't teach them subjective connotation, denotation. So in the aspect of person, place, or thing, how can a person in their right persona be in the same category as a place and thing, which is ownership, which is this, black, which is this, which is a cell phone? Come on. How can we teach the color spectrum come from white to dark? That's not true science. Everything comes from dark to light. That's what Carmen dating is. That's what 666 is. 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons. When we're in the context of science, we're in the context of melanin, we're in the context of carbon. So you can't be connotated. But no one knows the first albinos left Central Asia. Who knows? And I'm not just going to try to come up with my own analogy. I'm just going to go from a historical fact, however that happened. But it's also known, Moors. Watch this. One can't help but wonder if they hated the so-called Asiatics or the Moors was the result of ancient memories of the past abuse, somehow kept alive for thousands of years through stories and fake stories and songs. It's like when I be telling Moors and my brothers and sisters, they be singing that song, Amazing Grace. That song ain't even about you. A ranch like me. That was the European singing the song because how he grew up and he was enslaving Asiatics. He was asking for forgiveness for God before he was dying. And you sing these songs. And I say everything means something. So when you take a negative perspective or a negative spirit on yourself, that's crazy. And we won't even do the research. That's where that song come from. And we won't even do the history. Talk about that's ours. That ain't. That's like kumbaya. They tell you that means some come by here. No, it don't. That means stand up and arise. So much falseness. You gonna come by here and do what? Yep. But perhaps they were simply preyed upon, man. So we got so what we got to do, man. Understand how people migrated in land mass, and it's also not known why the Aryans would hazard and return the lands originally found in certain areas and try to claim it. Just from a historical aspect, more research the doctrine of discovery. When I talk about indigenous people law and policy, research the doctrine of discovery and research a couple cases. The case of McIntosh and Johnson, how certain religion, Christianity, and so-called Catholic, which is the same thing. Research that from a historical aspect. That's all I do is challenge more to do that. I don't come from no biased place. But remember, I was talking about Hellenism in Greece. It took the Aryans many hundreds of years to master the language. When you get the 1828 dictionary and you look up the Hellenistic, I did that science already. I have the 1828 dictionary. I'll give you the landmass. I mean, it's man, you just been tricked and bamboozled, man, because we won't do the history. And we let Moors lie. Man, when the brother told me to watch that Hidden Colors, and I still ain't watched it, when he was saying that Africa was named after Africanus, and I already proved that's not from historical fact, and why would brothers say that and say they're scholars? I have no idea. And that's what I was telling the brother. I'm not even finna deal with that. But simple research, scholarly research, which they say they are, will prove that's not true. But Hellenism is an adjective pertaining to the Hellenists or inhabitants of Greece, so-called from Hellenus in Greece, or from Hellenin. Hellenism, a noun, a phrase in the idiom genius, or the construction of the Greek language. Hellenist, a noun, a Grecian Jew, a European Jew per se, a Jew who used the Greek language. One skilled in the Greek language, Hellenistic, adjective, pertaining to the Hellenist. The Hellenistic language was the Greek spoken or used by the Jews who lived in Egypt. What Jews? What Jews, you may ask? Alexander the Greek, when he wanted to make a European pharaoh by force, by killing a thing. So that's Serapis Christos. I hope you know that science. And other countries where the Greek language prevailed. In the Italian, you have Caesar Borgia, Moors. Hellenize, a verb, to use the Greek language. Hell's Point, how did Alexander the Greek get there? A narrow strait between Europe and Asia. Asia is Africa. Asia just modern. That's how he got there. Now called the Dardanelles, a part of the passage between the Euxine and the Aegean Sea. It's just what it is. People getting you caught up. All in our Quran, it talks about the Hebrew God, all this, and I do the connections. Hebrew is a noun, one of the descendants of Eber or Heber, but particularly a descendant of Jacob, who was a descendant of Eber, an Israelite. I mean, I don't gotta go. American, a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper colored races, found here by the Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. But how can a European find somebody? You came to their land. It's telling you right there that they're not indigenous to the land. That's why certain people, when I tell Moors, you are indigenous to the land, not a sovereign. But that's even deeper. When I talk about autotoxin is an aboriginal, indigenous to the land. All you have to do is just study it. It's right in your face. It's right in our face. So that's why I say there's no reason to argue. If you understand science and who you are in history, you operate total 720. Even from a scientific aspect, when I talk about our Moorish masonry, and from my brothers with the higher science that I teach, my 99th rights that I teach, 32 and 33 degrees is just a level above freezing. That's no science. And if brothers are part of temples, you should get that 32 and 33 in the temples. That's when the fez and the turban, you have it on. You should understand those how can I tell you, material manifestations. But 720 is the synchronicity or the connections of the material and the spiritual. We have 99 degrees, Moors. Don't you know when European masons When they leave the Blue Lodge, they become shrine. When they become 32 and 33 degrees, and that's when they put the fez on, and they become sons of Muslims. I mean, this is just facts. I mean, there's nothing to argue about. Let's see. How about what brother say? Islam, indeed, man. Like, okay, these albinos who enter Europe, as illustrated by horse nomads, were of course not Hellenists, what they say. But it's a book in book 1. Herodotus says this about the Hellenists. The Hellenic race has never, since its first origin, changed its speech. This at least seems evident to me. It was a branch of Pelasgic, was separated from the main body, and first was scanty in numbers of little power, meaning their language. But the lineage of the ancient Greeks is always a source of controversy. In the histories of Herodotus, which is the European writing, they clearly identify the lineage of each major Greek tribe. These books are considered one of the seminal works of history in Western. Remember when I talk about Western and Eastern? Western, man, when I show you, when I did the research of the encyclopedias, and I can't say destroyed, but I proved that that's pseudoscience, because I don't want to use negative words as vibrations. I want to keep things positive. But I proved that those encyclopedia Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were nothing but pens. I proved no science came from the West, all came from the East. All those so-called Europeans they were taught by Moors. From a historical aspect, when people quote Adam Blavatsky or Blavatsky, all those, even Manly P. Hall, all that's Moorish science. I prove it from historical fact. I show how the Europeans from Spain went to the temples and stole the history, and in their pen they tell you. So it's nothing to argue about. But the earliest so-called black European writings that they say they know about is the Linear, a script which first appeared in Crete, the middle Minion period in 1700 to 1500 BC, but that's bullcrap. After the so-called white invaded circa 1012 BC, 1200 BC, and then they say all writing stopped, but that's not true. This period is commonly called the Greek Dark Ages. Just like when I tell you the Spora, that's just modern gibberish. They always give you things to try to disconnect you to the land when we're always here, all over this land, all over. When writings reappeared, per se, from their pen in about 750 BC, Greeks had adopted an alphabet that came from a Phoenician script. But we know we had writings, the Technogrammaton, we already had writings, man. The Phoenicia, the Phoinikeia was the name for the letters. This is what I'm telling you, it comes from something already written. The Greeks say they modified some of the letters for their vowels. But we know the history. You got to understand when you say modern, when you look at modern Greek sculptures, nothing. They fakes. Created mostly in the last 200 years. And you don't have to just do the research and ask the right questions. There's a such thing as modern and ancient. When I show modern pictures in the real museums that's hidden of artifacts, then I show you modern ones, and you be like, they changed them, the color and everything. They're just facts. I'm telling you. I can show you real ancient pictures of real Greeks and things of back in the times. Man, look, hold on. I'm gonna show you a quick picture of modern. And so let me pull this down. That's modern. I don't know if you can see that. That's modern Greek sculptures, which they created. Those are real Greek sculptures. Modern. You see how they look like people. You know things modern. So that's what I'm talking about, Moors. I can show you in museums how the god Artemis, she's totally changed. You can research that stuff for yourself. If you research it online, she's totally, her whole pigment totally changed. I can show you how they try to say it's just so much, man. It's a conversion, or they're trying to convert and say what you believe in is bullcrap. My brother, like, what? I mean, more. I'm gonna show you a picture. I'm gonna show you some pictures from a silk scroll depicting a hunting exhibition of Khan, the Yellow Mongolian, painted by the court artist Lu Guandi in circa 1280 AD. Shows what are probably black Huns who are also Mongolians. I'm gonna show you the pictures of them. And man, I wanted to turn this around, man, so I'm gonna have to show one camera. Let me see. Can I get this? Cause my pictures be tripping. I'm gonna show one, then I'll show the other. I'm sorry. I have to do it like this, Morris. You see what I'm saying? You see that? Research. Here go. There you go. So we can be politically correct. I'm gonna show my other brothers and sisters, so we can know the factual things. And I want you to research this stuff, man, for yourself, for you can know it, for you can see it for yourself. For you can ask questions. It's pictures, it's monuments, it's things in the museum, man, that can dot from historical aspects, so we can be clear on history or our story, whatever you want to call it. You got to look at the maps, look at the aliens. The aliens were a group of Samaritan tribe, also known over the course of history by another group of related names, including the variation, the Azi, the Oz, and the O's, the OS, Bulgarian Uzi, Hungarian Gazi, Russian Gazi, Georgian Azi. It is this name that is root of the modern, Assetin or Ossestin, Ossetin. So when we be talking about, how can I say more? When people be saying they know certain words and I say more, a lot of these words are the same thing depending on the dialect, depending on the tongue, depending on the language. And words have meaning. When we talk about the science, when I talk about Africa and the Ka meaning to open up the room and the AFRI, when I break all this stuff down esoterically, I mean, it's all there, Moors. It's all there in ancient writings. The migratory path of the Vigestov or the Germanics area, how they migrated. The Vigestovs or the Visiggoths in 376, the Goth, long-standing traders with the mercenaries from the Roman Empire, who were settled in large numbers of north bank of Danube, came under aggressive attack from the Huns. The leader came to an argument with the Emperor Valens. But I can go on and on with this history, man. I can talk about the Slavs. According to the Eastern homeland theory, prior to becoming known to the Roman world, Slavic-speaking tribes were part of many multi-ethnic confederacies of Eurasia, such as the Sarmatarian, the Hun, and the Gothic empires. The Slav emerged from obscurity when the westward movement of the Germans in the 5th and 6th centuries AD. I can go on and on with that. The so-called Turks, the last remaining whites in Asia. The Turks before admixing with the indigenous so-called black Anatolians. They were originally albinos too, were chased out of Asia by the yellow Mongols. Little is known about the origins of the Turkic people, and much of the history, even up to the time of the Mongolian conquest in the 10th and the 13th AD, is shrouded in obscurity. Chinese documents of the 6th century AD refer to the emperor of the Tu Chun as consisting of two parts of the northern and western Turks. The empire submitted to the normal scrutiny of Chinese twang of the emperor. Man, we could connect all these Turkish peoples, these Turkish countries. We could do the synchronicity of all these maps. And now we're gonna go all the way back to what? The Ottoman Empire. Here we go. Watch this. Let me see if I got this. Let me see if I got my book out. Yep. The Ottoman Empire, the history of the reign of Ferdinand and Isabella. I mean, the history is there, man. If you don't know about this history, the history is there. The history is there. This is one of the biggest wars in history. And we don't have this science to teach, to stand on truth and be like, no, that's not true. And be like, why? Because based on historical facts and landmass and geographical area, we don't have to come from no biased place. We can come from love, from a historical aspect. I'm telling you, man. It's just facts, Moors. It's just facts. But as I leave you, man, I can tell you why we got a little bit of time. I already lectured on the forgotten cause of the Civil War. Look how much these books, when you research it, I do a whole lecture on it. It'll connect the dots. They don't teach this in school. This is what I lectured today on the campus, and it blew their minds. And it's all there. But they try to make this stuff super expensive. I'm telling you. I lectured on that. I lectured on the 103 amazing facts about the so-called Black Indian of the Western Hemisphere. And we got to understand what white by law is as a status. But I'm going to touch on a little bit of the amazing facts about the Indian of the Western Hemisphere. And then and that'll be it. I'm going to give you a couple pin drops, and I hope you research this, because we're not here to converse for religious dogma. We are scientists, and I'm just a teacher, and I'm a master mason, and it's just what it is. I'm not under no European dogma. I haven't signed no oath. It's nothing secret to me, because the Moor's eye is not surrounded by no pyramid. I haven't took no oath. I teach all the sciences, and I correct. We have to make sure we don't practice malpractice to our brothers and sisters if we're trying to heal our brothers and sisters mentally, spiritually, and physically, and save fallen humanity, which is the woman, and understand the synchronicity. We got to learn this. But so-called indigenous people have lived here in the Western Hemisphere since the immemorial time. So-called Black Indians were not spawned or created as a result of Africans coming out of the Western Hemisphere doing the transatlantic slave trading, mixing in the native people of the Western Hemisphere region, also known as the Native Americans. Native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, also known as Indians, did not refer to themselves or their ancestors as Indians. So we use the word Indian since most people are accustomed to it as a title. The word Indian, red man, and Native American are European colonized terms. Native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere refer to themselves by ways of tones. When I talk about when you see the so-called Indian saying hi-ya, 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 when I talk about palindrome words, you have ya going to the right and to the left when I do the synchronicity. But Moors don't want to understand that when I talk about vibrations. Do you understand what a palindrome is? It's all in our Circle 7 Quran when they talk about the Hebrew God. It's all in our secret brotherhood of the East. It's there. So we are there with vibrations and tones of an expression. Our spirit or your spirit said who and what you were. The name given to you was based upon what type of spirit you possess, Moors. All native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians, possess different philosophical or physiological features like hair, texture, bone structure, skin tone. It all varied depending on what side of the so-called globe you were in, Moors. All native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere did not and do not have high cheekbones, slanted eyes, reddish copper skin, or straight black hair. All native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere did not live in teepees and pueblos. We just give it some history. Most of the reservations, Indians were carefully selected. Listen to me. about the doctrine of discovery, when I show you about the Indian reservations, when the Indian reservations are ran by governments, when people diss science. I'm getting my PhD in doctrine in indigenous people law and policy. Research the doctrine of discovery. Oh, what book I'm reading? I'm reading from the 103 Amazing Facts about the Black Indian of the Western Hemisphere. But most reservations, Indians were carefully selected by the U.S. government to occupy reservations when reservations were being established. The U.S. government, for the most part, selected pale-skinned Indians or Hollywood version Indians to occupy U.S. government-established reservations. This is history, man. Like I said, I ain't coming up with nothing new. It's in the book. It's in the history books. This was law. They called them heathens. They called the indigenous people heathens. All through history, the indigenous people of the land were stripped of their land or killed off. It's just what it is. U.S. government selected a certain physiological or a certain phenotype of native or Indian per se to promote the world as this is the real Indian, as well as this is how a real Indian look, Moors. The dark-skinned native indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, aka the Indians, were reclassified during the 17th and 1800s as Negroes and coloreds. You can research this stuff, man. This history. Certain dark-skinned natives were allowed to settle on reservations with pale-skinned natives. Most were not. Pale-skinned natives came about as a result of the original dark-skinned native breeding with pale-skinned Europeans. A light-skinned native born from this union would again breed a pale-skinned European. Thus, the progamy of the union will become more pale or genetically recessive, which a lighter pigmentation. And after centuries of the breeding process, Moors eventually produced the pale-skinned native of the Western Hemisphere. The dark-skinned natives who did not mix their seed still endured. The U.S. government had reclassified most as Black Americans or African Americans. I'm not coming from nobody's place, Moors. I come from historical history. It's in the libraries. I don't come from no biased place. But I hope we understand who we are so we can operate in our right persona. Most dark-skinned natives indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, Indians per se, who were reclassified as Negroes or colored during the 17th and 1800s, have found themselves in the 20th and the 21st century, again reclassified as what? Black Americans and African Americans. Dark-skinned native indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, who embraced the Spanish culture during the colonial era, either by choice or by force, have found themselves engulfed or more assimilated into Spanish culture and Spanish language. Now, most of them have lost their knowledge of themselves and their true identity, and they have been reclassified as Latino or Hispanic. All native people or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians, spoke different dialects of language synonymous to the Hebrew language. When I talk about the Bantu, when I talk about Moorish Latin, come on, man. We spoke a dialect. Most early European writings during the 1400s throughout the 1800s, including the so-called pale-skinned Jews, all agreed that the heathen savage of the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians, throughout the Americas were without a doubt descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. I just gave you the history of the American Indians, James of Adar. All the earlier writings tell that. So you remove religious dogma. A pale-skinned European by the name of James Adar. Who? The book I just told you. James Adar, an English writer and a trader during the 18th century, lived among the Black Indians in Southeast. James Adar wrote a book entitled History of the American Indian. In the book, he claimed that the Indians of the Western Hemisphere were the descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. James Adar, in his book History of the American Indian, wrote 23 arguments to support his findings that the so-called American Indians were descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. Moors. Also in the book Moors, the Arab by where that book at? There's a book called the Did I write that book down? I don't want to keep pulling all my stuff out because I hate putting it back in. But it's a book called The Arab. Where is that? Did I write it down for y'all? Yep, by Bertram Thomas. And he explains the history of the people, who the real Arabs was, because he stayed with him, a professor. He stayed with him 14 years, a British professor. It shows the true identity of who the so-called Arab is. And I want you to research that for yourself, because it's not a such genetic type of Arab, just like it's not a genetic type of Jew. So you got to see who the indigenous people of that land is from a historical and geographical aspect. But the titles Black American and African American are fake. Our misnomers, Mexican, Latino, are fake and inappropriate European colonized titles to keep indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, aka the Indians, which was short for indigenous, or Indo, man of color, under a spell of ignorance. The title Black American and African American were purposely created to psychologically and spiritually disconnect indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere from the true motherland, which is right up under your feet, Moors. You know, certain figures that was put in our face that to be our heroes started and promoted the fake title of African American. Jesse Jackson did that. Imposed something on brothers and sisters. And it become profitable. There is a campaign going on that the U.S. government sponsor natives that preach a doctrine says that Black Indians of the Western Hemisphere is a result of African mixture. Not true. Most so-called Black Americans or so-called African Americans, they don't know. They don't know. The school system and the media have two biggest giants programmed to misinform the children. Disconnected from the land. Disconnected from the land. The term Moor was applied to dark-skinned, brown-skinned, and reddish-brown-skinned people who were not only indigenous to Europe, but to West and North Africans. Even Blacks and Indians of Western Hemisphere were also dubbed with the title. We're Moors. Indigenous Black Celtics, indigenous so-called Black Britons, indigenous so-called Black, but more Portugals. Before Abraham Lincoln was the president, he defended the Moor in court. Said just because his skin was a certain color, he wasn't no Negro in color, because that was a chattel slave. Black didn't mean nothing in the court of law. And indigenous Black Moors, per se, also known as what? We were Moors, had a long time knowledge of indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere. These Moors were well informed of the different customs, traditions, and language of the natives of the Western Hemisphere. These dark-skinned Europeans, because they were living in Europe. These dark-skinned Europeans, Moors. Research the Ancient Modern Bricks by David Mackey Ritchie. Both, we were all over. But these indigenous Black Europeans, Moors, not only solicited the New World to pale-skinned Europeans, but also waged war on indigenous people of Western Hemisphere, or the Indians. I can go on and on, but I'm going to leave it right there, Moors. I love you all. Getting real history. Love. Truth, peace, freedom, justice, health, and wealth. Peace.